The infrastructure manuals published across Britain and America in the 1850s weren't written for specialists. They were written for everyone. Public works guides, railway operation standards, municipal water system protocols. They assumed the reader could interpret technical diagrams, follow multi-step procedures, and understand geometric principles without illustration. They were printed in editions of thousands, distributed to regional offices, filed in county libraries. And they were written as if the entire population could read them. In 1850, literacy rates in Britain hovered near 60%. In America, outside New England, they sat lower. Yet the documentation for the decade's largest infrastructure projects, aqueducts, rail networks, gas lighting systems, contain no simplified versions, no picture guides, no oral tradition backup. Just dense technical English, printed in small type, filed in administrative centers across 2 continents. By 1855, there were over 9,000 miles of railway in Britain alone. The operational manuals for those lines weren't kept in locked archives. They were regional standards. In America, canal systems stretching hundreds of miles used maintenance protocols that required clerks in remote outposts to read, interpret, and execute instructions about flow rates, lock mechanisms, and seasonal adjustments. The paperwork assumed competence that the census data didn't yet reflect. This is an investigative documentary examining historical architecture, infrastructure, and institutional patterns through a perspective sometimes labeled Tartaria, an interpretive framework, not a proven historical claim. We'll be looking at timing, scale, and the assumptions embedded in systems, not certainties, observations. The mismatch wasn't just about who could read. It was about who the system thought existed. In 1851, the first Public Library Act passed in Britain, allowing towns to establish free libraries funded by local taxes. Within a decade, hundreds opened. They weren't small. The Liverpool Public Library, opened in 1852, held over 11,000 volumes at launch. The reference room was designed for simultaneous use by hundreds of patrons. But the population that could use it, functionally not legally, was still forming. The Bodleian Library in Oxford expanded its technical collection dramatically in the 1850s. Engineering, hydraulics, surveying, chemistry. These weren't locked behind university access. They were cataloged for public consultation. Someone, somewhere, expected readers. Boston's public library system, formalized in 1854, didn't begin with children's primers. It opened with 16,000 volumes spanning literature, science, and technical references. The reading rooms were built to hold over 300 people. The city's population at the time was around 150,000. The assumption wasn't that a fraction might read, it was that reading was structural. Across both nations, these systems didn't grow into literacy. They arrived alongside it or slightly before. The technical manuals themselves carried another assumption: geographic coordination. A railway signaling standard written in London in 1852 wasn't just for London. It was reprinted in Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham within months. By 1854, nearly identical versions appeared in American rail hubs: Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York. The language was the same. The diagrams matched. The procedures were interchangeable. This wasn't coincidence. It was policy. But policy assumes enforcement. Enforcement assumes staff who can read the policy. Staff assumes training. Training assumes literacy. And literacy in 1850 was still catching up. The Erie Canal's operational documentation, printed in 1853, included lock schedules, tonnage tables, and seasonal maintenance requirements. The canal stretched 363 miles. It required hundreds of lock operators, toll clerks, and maintenance crews scattered across rural New York. The manual assumed they could all read it. By 1856, gas lighting systems in over 200 British towns operated using standardized safety protocols, pressure regulations, leak detection procedures, seasonal adjustments for temperature. The instructions were printed, not taught orally. They sat in municipal offices in towns where half the population had learned to read within the last generation. The paperwork didn't wait. What's unusual isn't that these systems were documented. It's that the documentation assumed a literate administrative class that the demographics hadn't yet produced, and then that class appeared. By 1860, literacy rates in Britain had climbed past 70%. In parts of the American North, they neared 90%. The systems built in the 1850s suddenly had the workforce they'd been designed for. It's as if the infrastructure anticipated the population, as if someone knew the readers were coming. The Tartarian interpretive lens doesn't claim intent. It observes timing. The way certain systems feel like they were inherited, not invented, because they appear in forms too complete, too coordinated, too early. The 1850s manuals weren't experimental. They were standardized. Standard implies precedent. The scale becomes more visible when you map it. Between 1848 and 1860, over 40,000 miles of railway were built across Britain and the United States. That's not track alone. That's bridges, tunnels, stations, signal systems, maintenance depots, and administrative offices. Each required operational documentation. Each assumed a workforce that could interpret it. The London and North Western Railway, operational by 1846, employed over 15,000 people by 1851. The employee handbook ran to 340 pages. It covered everything from brake application standards to passenger complaint protocols. It wasn't a guideline. It was policy. And policy only works if the people executing it can read. In America, the Pennsylvania Railroad published its first comprehensive operations manual in 1857. It was distributed to every station master, dispatcher, and senior crew member across a network spanning 6 states. The manual wasn't simplified. It used technical terminology. It referenced other documents. It assumed familiarity with bureaucratic structure. The paperwork didn't just exist. It proliferated. By 1855, the British Board of Trade required all railway companies to submit detailed safety reports. Not summaries. Full technical breakdowns of incidents, equipment failures, and procedural violations. These reports were filed by regional managers in towns across England, Scotland, and Wales. The assumption was that every region had someone capable of producing them. They did. The question isn't whether the reports were filed. They were. It's whether the administrative capacity came first, or the demand for it. Municipal water systems followed the same pattern. The Metropolitan Commission of Sewers, established in London in 1848, produced technical standards for waste removal, drainage slope calculations, and pipe material specifications. These weren't guidelines for engineers alone. They were distributed to parish councils, local contractors, and municipal clerks across the city's expanding districts. By 1858, Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system was under construction. The project required coordination across dozens of contractors, hundreds of laborers, and a vast administrative network managing contracts, material orders, and progress reports. The documentation for that coordination assumed literacy at every level of oversight. The same year, New York began upgrading its water distribution system. The Croton Aqueduct, completed in 1842, had been supplemented by reservoirs, distribution mains, and valve systems throughout the 1850s. The operational protocols for that system, pressure management, seasonal flow adjustments, contamination monitoring, were documented in manuals kept at municipal offices across Manhattan and Brooklyn. The manuals assumed the clerks could read them. The clerks could. But 15 years earlier they might not have. Gas lighting systems expanded even faster. In 1837, fewer than 20 British towns had gas street lighting. By 1857, over 200 did. Each system required installation standards, safety inspections, billing protocols, and maintenance schedules. The documentation was uniform. A gas fitter trained in Manchester could work in Bristol using the same manual. The Gas Light and Coke Company in London published its safety regulations in 1854. The document ran to 89 pages. It covered valve operation, leak detection, pressure testing, and emergency shutoff procedures. It was distributed to every regional depot and expected to be followed by workers who, a generation prior, might not have been able to read their own names. The infrastructure assumed the skill set. Then the skill set appeared. The administrative layer beneath these systems is where the pattern sharpens. County record offices across Britain expanded dramatically in the 1850s. They didn't just store documents, they required staff to catalog, retrieve, and manage them. The General Register Office, established in 1837 to record births, deaths, and marriages, had by 1851 created a nationwide network of local registrars. Each registrar was expected to maintain legible records, submit quarterly reports, and follow standardized formats. The system assumed bureaucratic literacy before universal education existed. In the United States, the census of 1850 was the first to record individual names rather than household heads. It required enumerators in every county to document occupation, birthplace, literacy status, and property value for millions of people. The forms were complex. The instructions were written, not oral. The assumption was that rural counties in states like Tennessee, Indiana, and Missouri had clerks capable of executing the task. They did. But the educational infrastructure to produce them had only recently begun expanding. The timeline compresses further when you look at professional training. Engineering schools began formalizing in the 1840s. Britain's Institution of Civil Engineers, founded in 1818, didn't start standardized certification until the 1850s. Before that, engineers were trained through apprenticeship. Yet by 1855, infrastructure projects across both nations were following written standards that assumed formal training. The standards preceded the schools. The same applies to municipal planning. Urban zoning regulations, building codes, and fire safety standards began appearing in American cities in the 1850s. They weren't enforced by specialists. They were enforced by city clerks, inspectors, and local officials who had to interpret legal and technical language simultaneously. Boston's Building Code of 1855 ran to over 60 pages. It specified load-bearing requirements, chimney construction standards, and street width regulations. Enforcement required inspectors who could read architectural plans, interpret legal statute, and document violations in writing. The infrastructure assumed the institution. The institution appeared. What the Tartarian framework observes is this. The administrative state of the 1860s feels like it was designed in the 1850s for a population that didn't fully exist until the 1860s. The manuals, the standards, the bureaucratic systems, they weren't experimental. They were operational. Operational implies precedent. Precedent implies inheritance. Whether that inheritance was institutional memory, coordinated planning, or something less easily categorized depends on interpretation. But the timing remains. The systems came first. The people caught up. The term Tartaria doesn't appear in the 1850s manuals. It appears on maps. For over 2 centuries, European cartographers labeled the vast interior of Asia as Tartary or Tartaria. It wasn't a nation. It wasn't an empire in the political sense. It was a geographic designation for regions beyond the reach of Western diplomatic contact. By the 1800s, as Russia expanded eastward and Western powers formalized treaties with China and Japan, the label faded from maps. The land didn't disappear. The name did. In modern usage, Tartaria has been reinterpreted. It's become a framework, a way of examining infrastructure, architecture, and institutional systems that feel too coordinated, too advanced, or too widespread for their official timelines. It's not a claim of fact. It's a lens. A way of asking whether certain systems were built or inherited. The 1850s documentation fits that frame uncomfortably well. There are 3 ways to interpret the pattern. The first is institutional foresight. The idea that planners in the 1840s and 1850s understood that literacy was expanding and built systems in anticipation of that expansion. They created the manuals, the standards, the bureaucratic structures knowing that within a decade, the workforce would exist to operate them. It's a model of deliberate preparation. It's supported by the evidence. Educational reform movements were gaining momentum. Public libraries were being established. Teacher training colleges opened across Britain in the 1840s. The infrastructure of literacy was being constructed alongside the infrastructure of industry. But foresight doesn't explain the uniformity. The second interpretation is parallel development. The idea that Britain and America, facing similar industrialization pressures, independently developed similar solutions at similar times. Railways needed operational standards. Water systems needed maintenance protocols. Gas lighting required safety documentation. The fact that these systems appeared in comparable forms across 2 continents reflects shared challenges, not shared origins. This model is harder to dismiss. Parallel evolution happens. Communication between engineers, planners, and administrators crossed the Atlantic regularly by the 1850s. Standards could spread through professional journals, conferences, and correspondence. The similarity isn't mysterious, it's networked. But networks require nodes. And the nodes, those regional clerks, those county administrators, those railway station masters, required literacy that the general population didn't yet have. The third interpretation is the one the Tartarian framework highlights most directly: inherited capacity. This model suggests that the systems of the 1850s weren't invented from scratch. They were adaptations, restorations, Reactivations of administrative and infrastructural patterns that had existed before. Patterns that had decayed, fragmented, or been interrupted, and were now being reassembled. It doesn't require a lost civilization. It requires a lost institutional memory. Consider the year 1816. It's sometimes called the year without a summer. Volcanic eruptions in the East Indies the year prior ejected enough ash into the atmosphere to disrupt weather patterns globally. Crop failures followed. Famine spread across Europe and North America. Populations migrated. Systems collapsed. By 1820, recovery was underway. But recovery assumed something to recover to. And what followed in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, and 50s wasn't just reconstruction. It was systematization. As if the blueprints had been pulled from archives. The Tartarian lens doesn't claim those archives were labeled Tartaria. It claims the systems feel too complete to be entirely new. The manuals of the 1850s don't read like first drafts. They read like revisions. The standards aren't experimental, they're codified. The bureaucratic structures don't feel like innovations, they feel like reinstitutions. Whether that's perception or pattern is the question left open. What's undeniable is the speed. In 1840, Britain had no standardized railway signaling. By 1850, it did, and the system was being replicated across Europe and America. In 1845, most American cities had no building codes. By 1855, dozens did, and they shared structural similarities that suggest coordination beyond coincidence. The infrastructure of the 1850s didn't grow organically. It arrived in waves. Coordinated. Documented. Assumed. The populations it was designed for were still learning to read. The Tartarian interpretation doesn't resolve that tension. It names it. It suggests that what we call the Industrial Revolution might be better understood as the industrial reorganization, a reassembly of capacities that had existed in some form before, disrupted by events we've recorded as natural disasters, wars, or migrations, and then restored using documentation that survived when other things didn't. It's a metaphor as much as a model, a way of thinking about continuity and rupture, about whether history moves in straight lines or loops back on itself in ways we don't always recognize. The evidence doesn't prove it, but it doesn't disprove it either. What remains is the unsettling fit. The way the systems of the 1850s feel like they were waiting. The way the manuals assume a reader who doesn't yet exist, and then that reader appears almost on schedule. The way administrative networks span continents with a uniformity that feels too deliberate to be accidental, too widespread to be purely top-down. The Tartarian framework asks, what if the systems weren't built for a future population? What if they were rebuilt for a returning one? It's not a claim. It's a question. And the 1850s don't answer it. They deepen it. The technical documentation of that decade sits in archives now. Some of it digitized. Most of it untouched. The manuals still assume you can read them. They still assume you understand the context. They still carry the weight of a system that expected competence before the schools that would teach it had fully formed. Whether that's visionary planning, coordinated development, or something inherited from an earlier institutional structure depends on which interpretation feels most consistent with the evidence. None of them are comfortable. But the manuals remain, built for readers who weren't there yet, or readers who had been there before. The infrastructure assumed the population. The population appeared. And the timing still feels just slightly off.